Win the war in your mind, ladies and gentlemen, thinkers, builders, rebels of inertia. There's a war going on right now. Not on some battlefield, not across political lines, but in a place far more critical, your mind. And unlike external wars, this one is quiet, invisible, relentless. It's the battle between what you are and what you could be, between the voice that says this is too hard and the one that says try anyway, between fear of failure and logic that says failure is just data. Most people lose this war before they ever build anything that matters. They get paralyzed by overthinking, by doubt, by societal expectations programmed into them like bad code. You're not born limited. You're trained to stay limited. If your brain were hardware, most of you are running outdated software, fearware 1. 0, excuse OS procrastination. Exceed time to uninstall. The future doesn't care about your excuses. It only responds to action, execution, iteration. You want to build something big. You want to be something more. Win the war in your mind first, because the mind will sabotage you long before reality does. Let me be blunt. If your internal dialogue is garbage, it doesn't matter how brilliant your ideas are. Your inner code has to be optimized for risk, not comfort. For curiosity, not conformity. Here's the truth, self. Doubt is useful only once. It's a check engine light. After that, it's just noise. Rewire yourself to treat uncertainty like oxygen. Seek discomfort like fuel, because the ceiling you're hitting, it's not glass, it's made of thought. Your habits are votes for the person you want to become. Every morning, you either cast a vote for the version of you that builds or the one that delays. This isn't about motivation. Motivation is cheap. You need clarity, systems, a bias for action, and above all, resilience. Lose the idea that everything has to feel good before it works. It usually won't. Discomfort is the tax you pay for growth. Pay it. So here's the core algorithm. Identify the limiting belief. Challenge it like bad physics. Replace it with something executable. Run the test. Repeat. Mental toughness isn't about being unbreakable. It's about refusing to stay broken. The world is full of people waiting to feel ready. The ones who win, they build while scared, they think while moving, they ship, they break, they learn, they repeat. So, stop negotiating with the weaker version of yourself. The mind will follow reality if you force it. So bend your reality, win the war in your mind, because the future belongs to those who have already won it. Rewire your mind for risk, not comfort. Most people are unconsciously conditioned to optimize for comfort. It starts early. Systems designed to reward conformity and punish deviation. Schools teach obedience over creativity. Society praises safety over exploration. The narrative is clear. Minimize discomfort, follow predictable paths, stay inside the lines. And if you do that, you'll be rewarded with security, a stable job, a quiet life. But here's the problem. If your brain is wired for comfort, it will resist the very things required for progress. All innovation, all transformation starts from friction. You cannot disrupt, invent, or lead while clinging to comfort. Risk is the entry fee to anything worthwhile. Yet most people treat risk like a threat instead of a tool. That's not their fault. It's their programming. And like bad software, that programming can be rewritten, needs to be rewritten. If you want to create something valuable, whether it's a company, a product, or a new version of yourself, you have to override the built-in safety protocols in your mind, because those protocols are outdated. They evolved to keep you alive in a world full of predators and famine. They weren't designed for a world of exponential technology and limitless potential. You can't engineer a breakthrough with a brain that defaults to comfort. Comfort is a false signal. It feels good because it's familiar, not because it's right. Familiarity is not accuracy. Just because your mind is used to a certain path doesn't mean it's the best one. You can't treat emotional ease as a compass. It'll point you straight to mediocrity. The people who build remarkable things aren't fearless. They're functionally trained to process risk differently. They see risk as an equation, not a feeling, as data to be parsed, not avoided. This shift in perception is critical. It allows them to do what others won't. Move first, fail faster, iterate smarter. Most people feel fear and stop. Builders feel fear and analyze. Is this fear rational? What's the cost of inaction? What's the upside of pushing through? What will I learn if I fail? That inner dialogue matters more than intelligence. You don't need more IQ. You need a better operating system. One that rewards uncertainty, one that treats chaos as signal, one that doesn't associate pain with danger, but with transformation. Rewiring the brain for risk begins with self-awareness. You have to catch yourself in the act. Notice when your mind shuts down possibilities with language like, what if it doesn't work? What if I'm not ready? What will people think? Those are scripts, not truths. They're preloaded from years of social conditioning. They're not evidence, they're not math, they're noise. Then you reframe, what if it does work? What if failure is the fastest way to adapt? What if no one's thinking about me because they're too busy thinking about themselves? These aren't just motivational slogans, they're replacements. Neural overrides. The brain believes what it hears repeatedly, so you need to give it new input, not once, every day, until the default response is recalibrated. You don't overcome the comfort bias overnight. You chip away at it through consistent exposure to discomfort. You train your nervous system like you train a muscle. Start small. Say yes to the thing that makes you slightly anxious. Launch before you're fully ready. Share the idea before it's polished. Ask the question you're afraid to ask. Each repetition builds resilience, builds a new feedback loop. Discomfort, action, adaptation, growth. Eventually, discomfort stops being threatening. It becomes informative. You learn to listen to it, not as a warning, but as a compass. You run toward the edge of what you know, because that's where expansion lies. You begin to associate risk with opportunity, not danger. You shift from fear-based logic to exploratory logic. Most people will never do this, not because they can't, but because they never challenge the assumption that comfort is the goal. They confuse stillness with peace. They treat low stakes as success, but safety is expensive. It costs you growth, it costs you insight, it costs you relevance in a world that's moving faster every day. We are biologically inclined to protect ourselves, but we are technologically capable of much more. Your evolutionary instincts are lagging behind your potential. You can't let biology run your life when technology is running the world. The lizard brain isn't equipped to deal with rapid iteration, global scale, or exponential learning curves. It wants to keep you in the cave, but you were built to leave the cave. That conflict between ancient wiring and modern ambition is the real battlefield, and the side you feed will win. This doesn't mean recklessness. Risk is not chaos. It's calculated deviation from safety in pursuit of a larger reward. You need models, you need frameworks, but you also need tolerance, the ability to sit inside uncertainty and still make clear decisions. That's what separates creators from consumers, leaders from followers, drivers from passengers. The mental model here is simple. If you're too comfortable, you're not growing. If you're never uncomfortable, you're probably stuck. The best signal you're doing something meaningful is that it scares you a little, maybe a lot. That fear, that's your upgrade, that's your prompt. Don't run from it, interrogate it, understand it, then move anyway. Over time, you develop internal proof, moments when you acted despite fear and saw the result. This data accumulates, it rewires your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who hesitates and start seeing yourself as someone who executes. That shift is irreversible once it sticks, and once it does, your threshold for what's possible increases exponentially. Risk-tolerant minds build resilient systems. They invent, they adapt, they thrive. Because they know the truth most people miss. The future doesn't belong to the smartest or the safest. It belongs to those who reprogrammed their minds to lean into the unknown before they had permission, before they felt ready, before they were guaranteed anything at all. Self-doubt is noise after the first signal. The initial appearance of self-doubt is natural. In fact, it's useful. It acts as a diagnostic ping, a mental check, engine light that asks, are you prepared? Have you thought this through? Are there flaws in your current plan? That first signal has value. It prompts introspection. It can help you run simulations in your head before you commit real resources. It forces humility, forces pause. That's good, but beyond that first check, self, doubt turns into something else interference. Static, unproductive noise, and unless it's consciously muted, it loops endlessly, blocking execution and degrading mental bandwidth. That's where most people get stuck. They confuse the signal with the noise. They listen to doubt as if it's always offering insight, but it's usually just repeating the same few fears in slightly different words. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail publicly? What if I'm exposed as unqualified? These aren't insights. They're emotional residue. The brain, like any system, tends to reuse patterns, and once doubt becomes habitual, it stops delivering new information and just replays uncertainty on a loop. The issue isn't the presence of doubt. The issue is how long you keep giving it the mic. Highly effective people, builders, creators, innovators, don't eliminate doubt, they bracket it. They recognize it as part of the process, but they don't let it dominate the process. They use the first wave of doubt as a tool, then discard the rest. They've trained themselves to separate signal from noise, self. Doubt is not proof of failure. It's not a red flag by default. In many cases, it's just the brain flagging novelty. New action triggers resistance, and resistance often masquerades as internal criticism. The problem is that your brain evolved to optimize for survival, not success. It warns you about any deviation from the known, even if the known is mediocrity. So when you try something ambitious or uncertain, your nervous system sends out signals. Hesitation, anxiety, negative self-talk, but those aren't prophecies. They're just pings from a system that's bad at distinguishing between discomfort and danger. The mistake people make is assuming their thoughts are accurate just because they're loud, but mental volume doesn't correlate with truth. The voice that tells you you're not ready, it doesn't know, it's guessing. It's running a simulation. You don't owe it your obedience. You owe it your analysis. Doubt often shows up with strong emotional backing. It carries a feeling of certainty, even when it's factually baseless. That's because the emotional center of the brain fires faster than the rational center, so the narrative forms before the logic catches up. Unless you slow down and question that narrative, it will dictate your decisions. That's where many projects die, not from lack of ability, but from the internal monologue that prevents action. And the irony is, most of that monologue isn't even original. It's inherited, absorbed from past criticism, school systems, toxic environments, culture, media, authority figures. These voices get stored and replayed, creating the illusion of your own judgment, but it's not yours. It's cached noise from earlier in life, disguised as personal insight. If you don't challenge this noise, it becomes your operating system. It filters what you attempt. It warps what you believe you're capable of. You start running your life based on simulations of worst-case scenarios instead of real data, and the longer you stay in that loop, the harder it is to distinguish fear from fact. A mind dominated by doubt is not inert, it's active, but it's solving the wrong problems. Instead of asking, how can I build this? It asks, what if I fail? Instead of, what's the next step? It asks, what will people think? These are dead end loop. They don't lead anywhere. They burn cognitive fuel but yield no outcomes. If your inner monologue is constantly arguing against you, you're wasting processing power on battles that don't need to be fought. The fix is not to pretend doubt doesn't exist. Suppression doesn't work. Awareness does. You need to interrogate doubt. Make it submit to logic. Don't just listen to the voice. Question it. What exactly am I afraid of? Is this based on fact or projection? What would I tell someone else in this situation? Most of the time, doubt falls apart under scrutiny. It lacks evidence. It relies on fear of hypotheticals that may never materialize. Once you expose it, it loses its grip. Repetition is also key. You don't remove doubt once and for all. You train yourself to respond differently to it over time. You build a new reflex, hear the doubt, recognize the pattern, discard the noise, act anyway. And every time you do that, your threshold for internal resistance increases. The doubt shows up, but you don't obey it. You keep moving. That consistency rewires your identity. Eventually, you begin to accumulate proof. Proof that you can act in the presence of doubt, that you can succeed without feeling ready, that you can fail and still improve. That data is invaluable, because once you have proof, doubt has less leverage. It no longer gets to ask, what if you can't, because you've already shown that you can. People think confidence comes first. It doesn't. Action comes first. Confidence is just the residue of repeated execution. You do the thing while doubting yourself, and over time the evidence outweighs the emotion. You become someone who builds, not because you're fearless, but because you've stopped mistaking doubt for truth. The presence of doubt doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're pushing boundaries, but once that first signal has done its job, alerted you to risks, reminded you to think carefully, it has nothing left to offer. The rest is just delay dressed as analysis. If you let doubt stay in the room, it will try to run the meeting. It will disguise itself as wisdom, as prudence, but it's not. It's friction, it's inertia. It's noise, and if you don't mute it, it becomes the reason your ideas never ship, your goals never materialize, and your potential never activates. Discomfort is the tax for growth. Pay it. Growth doesn't happen in neutral conditions. It never has. Nothing evolves while everything stays easy. Discomfort is the natural cost of transformation, and any attempt to bypass it is essentially an attempt to avoid change. You can't upgrade yourself, your skills, or your impact without paying the price of discomfort. The problem is that most people treat discomfort as a stop sign. They hit friction and assume it means something is wrong. In reality, it usually means something is happening. When you stretch your body in a workout, your muscles protest. That tightness, that burn, it's not a problem. It's the exact indicator that adaptation is occurring. The same is true mentally, emotionally, professionally. You hit resistance not because you're weak, but because you're pushing into terrain your system isn't yet adapted to. That's the process, that's the signal, but most people have been conditioned to interpret that signal as danger rather than transformation. We live in a world optimized for comfort. Convenience is everywhere. The frictionless life is marketed as the ideal. Fast answers, fast food, fast relief, and the mind adapts accordingly. It starts seeking the path of least resistance not as a strategy, but as a default. The downside is that when something genuinely hard appears, something worth pursuing, it feels abnormal. The challenge feels like a malfunction, but discomfort is not a malfunction. It's the operating cost of doing anything that matters. The pursuit of comfort is understandable. It's biological. Comfort means safety. Safety means survival. The human brain was designed to keep you alive in an environment full of physical threats. But that same protective wiring becomes a liability in environments where physical safety isn't the issue, where intellectual, emotional, or reputational risk is the new frontier. The modern world doesn't kill you for launching a startup or posting your idea online or asking for feedback. But your nervous system still fires as if it might, so you retreat, you rationalize, you tell yourself you'll do it later, but that retreat is a tax dodge, you're skipping payment, and the result is stagnation. Growth has always been expensive. It demands your energy, your time, your ego. It forces you into situations where you're unsure of the outcome. It asks you to speak when you're afraid of being wrong, to act when you're afraid of failing, to move when it's more comfortable to stay still. This payment, this tax, can't be avoided. You either pay it now through discomfort, or you pay later through regret, and regret is much more expensive. One of the most dangerous myths is that the presence of discomfort is a sign you should stop. People say it doesn't feel right and take that as a reason to back off, but feelings aren't facts, especially when those feelings are triggered by something new or challenging. The body is a feedback system, but not every signal should be obeyed. You have to develop discernment. Is this discomfort a signal of danger or of growth? Is it trauma or just tension? Learning to tell the difference is a fundamental upgrade in how you move through the world. There's a kind of discomfort that signals you're on the wrong path, yes, but far more often, discomfort signals that you're finally off autopilot, that you're not repeating the same inputs expecting new results, that you're putting your ideas into motion instead of keeping them inside where they're safe and untested. And when you feel that kind of friction, where your mind resists, your palms sweat, your inner critic gets loud, that's when you know something real is happening. The people who grow fast, who evolve, who build, aren't immune to discomfort. They're fluent in it. They've taught themselves to expect it, to work through it. They don't see discomfort as an obstacle. They see it as a cost of doing business with reality. You want better skills, better results, better thinking, pay the tax, go through the reps, stay in the difficult conversation, stay at the keyboard when you feel blocked. Launch the thing even when it isn't perfect. Because discomfort is the bridge between intention and execution. Avoiding discomfort keeps you stuck in cycles. Comfortable habits breed familiar results. You might feel good in the short term, but over time that comfort calcifies. You start making excuses. You build stories about why it's not the right time, why you're not ready, why things are too complicated. But those stories are just invoices you haven't paid. They accumulate interest. And one day you wake up and realize you haven't actually moved. Not in months, not in years. You've been busy, but not forward. You don't have to like discomfort. You just have to stop fearing it. You have to stop mistaking it for danger. You can feel uncertain and still take action. You can feel awkward and still perform. That ability, to function inside friction, is one of the most valuable skills in the modern world, because the world is changing faster than your comfort zone ever will. You can train for this. Just like with any discipline, the goal isn't to eliminate the sensation, it's to raise your threshold. You start by doing things that make you slightly uncomfortable. Speak when you want to stay silent. Try when you'd rather observe. Publish when you'd rather polish. As you build tolerance, you increase the load. The projects get riskier, the stakes get higher, but your nervous system keeps up. It adapts. And now, what used to terrify you becomes normal. That's growth. That's what the tax buys you. When you meet someone who seems confident, decisive, capable, what you're seeing is not some innate gift. You're seeing someone who has paid more in discomfort than you have. They've sat with more tension, they've absorbed more friction, and because of that, they can move through spaces you can't. Yet every skill, every insight, every leap forward came with its own discomfort. The moments no one sees, the rejections, the awkward pitches, the failed launches, the long nights of uncertainty, those were the payments, and over time they added up. Compound discomfort builds compound growth. But you don't get that return unless you're willing to invest when it's hard. People want outcomes without the stress that comes with earning them, but outcomes are not awarded, they're extracted, pulled from the world through effort, resistance, and persistence. That resistance is built into the process by design. If it weren't there, everyone would do it. There'd be no distinction between the average and the exceptional. The difference isn't talent. The difference is who's willing to stay in discomfort longer, who's willing to act inside tension, who's willing to pay the tax no one else wants to. If you want growth, you can't just ask what it costs. You have to be ready to pay in full. Build while scared, think while moving. Waiting to feel ready is one of the most expensive delays in existence. The idea that clarity must come before action is a myth. Clarity is not a prerequisite. It's a result. You don't think your way into the perfect plan. You build your way into it. You move, you act, you test, and in that process the fog lifts. But most people stay stuck, trying to map the terrain before taking a single step. They treat uncertainty like a stop sign instead of what it really is. a standard condition of doing anything new. Fear will always be present when you're doing something that matters, not because you're broken or unprepared, but because your brain has no precedent. It doesn't know what's on the other side of the leap, so it fills the void with imagined threats. That fear feels real, but it's just a placeholder for unknown data. If you wait for the fear to vanish, you'll wait forever. The signal to move won't come externally. It has to be overridden manually, through action. You can't plan your way into courage. At some point, thinking becomes avoidance. Preparation turns into procrastination. Research becomes a crutch, and while you're busy refining the idea, perfecting the draft, rehearsing the pitch, someone else is already shipping, already learning, already adapting. Momentum always beats theoretical perfection. The person who moves, even imperfectly, gets the data first, and that data is power, it's feedback, it's directional insight that the cautious planner never gets. Building while scared isn't reckless. It's honest, it accepts fear as part of the operating system. It doesn't try to eliminate it. It runs in parallel. You act with shaky hands. You speak with a tight throat. You launch even when you're uncertain. Because you understand that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that fear isn't the boss. If your metric for action is confidence, you'll move slowly. But if your metric is momentum, you'll build your way through the fear. The thinkers who make the most impact are the ones who do their thinking while engaged in motion. They're not isolated theorists, disconnected from the consequences of their ideas. They're in the field, experimenting, adjusting, refining as they go. They use the feedback loop of action to upgrade their mental models. They don't get stuck in infinite loops of what if. They test the what if. They put it into code, into design, into language, into public view. And by doing that, they evolve faster. There's a bias in our culture toward the idea of the perfect launch. The right time, the perfect version, the flawless pitch. But that perfection never comes. It's an illusion built by fear. In reality, every successful product, company, or person started with something raw, something basic, something unfinished, but it moved, and that motion created leverage, not because it was ready, but because it was real. Because it existed outside of someone's head. The fear of looking foolish, of being wrong, of failing publicly. These are the gates most people never pass through, but those gates are thresholds. On the other side is not shame. It's freedom, because once you've acted in spite of fear, you realize the fear had no bite. You were holding yourself hostage with ideas that collapsed the moment you moved. Fear is fragile like that. It feels massive in anticipation, but shrinks in contact with reality. Momentum is one of the most underutilized tools in personal growth. It does more than create progress. It rewires your brain. Every time you act in the presence of fear, you send yourself a message. I can move even when I'm not certain. That message compounds. It builds identity. You go from being someone who hesitates to someone who executes. And once that identity shift locks in, the internal resistance loses power. There's a lie in perfectionism that says your first move must be your best move, but the truth is, your first move just needs to exist. Because once it does, it creates a feedback loop, a target, a prototype, something to learn from, something to refine. That's when real thinking begins, thinking that's grounded in action, not abstraction. Strategy born from friction, not fantasy. You don't need to know how to finish before you start. You just need to start, and starting doesn't require total clarity. It requires enough signal to justify motion. That's it. One assumption, one hypothesis, one push. You'll learn more from the first 10 steps than from 10 hours of planning, because the map changes once you're on the ground, and the only way to get the real map is to start moving. Fear isn't proof you're unprepared. It's proof you're alive to the stakes. You only fear things that matter, things that stretch you, that challenge your perception of who you are and what you're capable of. And that's exactly where you need to be, because building inside fear sharpens you. It forces precision, it creates urgency, It cuts through the noise and forces you to focus on what's essential. Execution under fear creates a type of clarity you can't manufacture in safety. When everything's theoretical, it's easy to get distracted by minor details, imagined problems, infinite options. But once you're building, fear compresses your attention. It filters what matters. It makes the stakes real. And in that space, you find creativity, you find efficiency, you find resolve. Thinking while moving doesn't mean being impulsive. It means embracing a loop. Act, assess, adjust, repeat. This loop is how progress happens. You make your move, you measure the impact, you refine the approach. That cycle creates real understanding. Understanding that static thinking can never produce. The world responds to action, and only through action can you measure your ideas against reality. Some of the best decisions are discovered, not designed. You stumble upon them in the act of doing. You don't realize what works until what doesn't work slaps you in the face. You don't understand what's essential until you're forced to choose under pressure. These insights don't show up in the planning phase. They live inside the build phase. There's no version of success that doesn't include fear, failure, and doubt. These aren't bugs in the system. They're core components of growth. And the faster you embrace that, the faster you move. Not because the fear is gone, but because it no longer controls your timing. Speed matters, not reckless speed, but directional speed. The ability to move while thinking. To decide while iterating, because every moment you spend waiting to be certain is a moment of lost data, lost momentum, lost evolution. The thinkers who win are the ones who think on the fly, course, correct in real time, and treat fear as background noise, not as a verdict. When you're scared, build anyway. When you're unsure, start anyway. When the voice in your head says, wait, challenge it. Ask, what can I learn by doing that I'll never learn by stalling? Because the answer is always more. You'll learn more in the mess than in the margins, more from doing than from doubting, more from showing up scared than from staying home safe.